Very good. Okay. Internet's going. We're ready to roll. Dr. Presley, we'd love for you to come up here and introduce our speaker.
Well, this is a distinct honor and privilege to be able to introduce Anne. And of course, as you know, Anne is the eldest daughter of Arnold and Laura Lee Tenenbaum. And as you may know, Arnold was a member of this club and served as the president in 1992-93, following Eddie Culver. And as you know, Arnold was president of Chatham Steel, who set a standard for this club and for this town in terms of philanthropy and civic leadership. And I remember so well in the early 1990s, when public education was really in desperate straits, and school buildings were falling down, and a bond issue went out before the public, and it was voted down. The public wasn't going to do it. And Arnold rolled up his sleeve, gathered some civic leaders, and opened up a new campaign. And that second bond issue passed and gave the public schools a chance. People respected him, they rallied to him, and when he spoke, they listened. He and Laura Lee were voracious art collectors who moved effortlessly between Savannah, Santa Fe, and New York. And I recall one evening he gave a paper to a group of us, and he pulled out a chest. And it wasn't a paper that he was going to give us. He started pulling out artifacts from Santa Fe, contemporary Indian artifacts, ancient Indian artifacts that was exquisite, and showing that depth of collection that he had. Anne and a lot of the rest of her family have inherited this remarkable instinct. She went to Savannah Country Day School through middle school. Malcolm Butler rushed up here to the platform and said, "You may not recognize me, but we were classmates in the 8th grade." Then she went to Northfield Mount Hermon and Sarah Lawrence College. She currently lives in New York and is married to Tom Lee, founder and president of Thomas H. Lee Capital. And of course, you may remember Tom has spoken at this club, and they have 3 lovely children. Following in the footsteps of her parents, Anne became an avid art collector, and that is what she will speak about today. She currently serves on the board of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Studio Museum in Harlem, and Film at Lincoln Center. But she's on many other boards, particularly in New York. One I noted was on the Public Art Commission for the New York City. Her fingerprints are all over New York in the best possible way. About 90 works from her photography collection were featured at the Metropolitan Museum in the exhibition Photography's Last Century, the Anne Tenenbaum and Thomas H. Lee collection. They donated a majority of the collection to the museum. She and her siblings have donated the majority of the parents' art collection. This is really important. It's the whole family to the Telfair Museums, to the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum in Santa Fe, and Dartmouth College, Arnold's alma mater. Boy, if you mention Dartmouth College, he just lit up. And that is not all. She is an actor, venture capitalist investor who serves on the board of M Theory Group, Hive Diversity, SHO Companies, and Forum. Well, I said, M Theory, what is that? So I looked it up, and I stopped when I read the first line. M Theory is a theory in physics that unites all consistent versions of superstring theory. That stopped me right there. It is mathematical physics with enormous implications for the real world, and you might want to talk to her after about her investing activities. We're grateful to see you're done, for having worked with Anne to make this visit possible, and for having arranged our fine arts programs for the month of January. And we're looking forward to this. Thank you.
While we're setting up here, I'd like to say thank you, Paul and Marjorie, and to everyone here. Most of what Paul said was true. It's a little embarrassing to say that M Theory is actually the name of a music company that I'm on the board of. A lot less erudite than astrophysics. And you will hear a few things repeated in my remarks that Dr. Presley referenced. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ann Tenenbaum, obviously, and it's a pleasure to be here in my hometown, which I said to Malcolm Butler, who I probably haven't seen in 40 years, that, you know, no matter what, it's home. I love coming here and feeling like I'm home. I'm going to talk about art and community today, both of which have been cornerstones of my life. I know many of you knew my parents. My dad, as was remarked, was a long-standing member of the Rotary Club. I believe you forgot to say that he was Rotarian of the Year in 1994. And I'm very honored to be speaking to an organization that he held in such high regard. Thank you, Celia Dunn, for inviting me, and all of you for being here today. So collecting art is, or anything really, is an intensely personal endeavor. You're indulging yourself, your own tastes, your own vision, your ideas, your own search for meaning. There are lots of ways to deal with collections that you've amassed over your lifetime. You can sell them while you're alive. You can leave your heirs to deal with it. I think my sister and I would suggest that is the worst possible case scenario. Or you can donate partial interest in your collection or your whole collection in your lifetime. And I've learned a lot in the past 2 years about the space where public and private can serve one another beautifully through art. And this is my story about taking a private vision and making it public in my lifetime so that I can enjoy the experience. Early influences, so if you knew my parents, you knew, as was referenced, they were deeply involved in the community. There was really no question growing up that I would also be involved in the community if I had the opportunity. They believed in giving back through deep engagement, grit and money. And I put up a partial list of their involvements in the community because honestly it was too many to record, and many that honestly I didn't even know about, that Dad never even mentioned. As we weren't living here, we couldn't keep track of everything he and Mom did. So my own philanthropy has centered primarily around education and the arts in New York City, where I've lived for 38 years. I've served on numerous boards and worked for the success of many other institutions. The work has almost always been interesting and gratifying. I'm sure if you served on boards, you know what I mean. And my parents also taught me just about as much as they did about community, about the arts, and the role that arts can play in life and in serving the community. So we grew up in 1971. We moved to a house in downtown Savannah that my parents had renovated. And it was on the cover of House Beautiful magazine, which I was very proud of at 10 years old. But mostly because it was a little controversial, our house back in the day. It was very contemporary, lots of patterns and colors. It was absolutely not traditional in any way, except that my parents had not altered the structure of the house. And there were people who didn't approve. And certainly friends of mine, young friends of mine, 10 years old, who would come over and be appalled at things they saw in our house, like stripes on the ceiling and giant arrows and things like that. So having the house on the cover of the magazine validated something for me, that my parents not caring what other people thought of how they wanted to live was an important tenet of their life and has become of mine. My mom especially, she really did not care if you didn't like her house. She wanted to live in a vibrant, stimulating, colorful environment, and if you didn't like it, that was your problem. But when you're 10, that can be hard to integrate into your own philosophy. So the magazine spread definitely helped. Also, we were taken on lots of trips as kids, not beach vacations like some of my friends got to go on, but cities where we tromped through every museum that existed, every historical site, which we complained about bitterly, but of course, as a grown-up, we're all very appreciative of. And it really, all of these things helped me develop my own love of art and all the arts that I realized really connected me to all the complexities of what it means to be human. My first piece of art that I collected, which unfortunately I don't have a picture of because it's a little worse for the wear, was a piece my parents bought me for graduation from high school, which at the time I was sort of, like, really? That's my gift? But, eventually I realized that it was much better than having a little bit of money that I would have wasted on something frivolous. I spent a lot of years in New York working, and every time I had a little extra money, I would buy a little piece of art, or if my grandparents wanted to give me a present, I would ask for a piece of art. So I had a few things, and then I met my husband in 1993, and he was just coming out of a long marriage where they had collected Dutch masters, and he asked me if I was interested in Dutch masters, and I said theoretically, but not to live with, and he decided, he's like, great, we'll start over. Won't have to fight about that. And I started collecting in earnest, and I became very immersed in the art world just by accident, by virtue of the fact that I loved going to museums and galleries and meeting other collectors. I joined some museum boards, and through all of these ways, started going to auctions. I learned about my own taste, about what I liked. I've learned how to live by the same tenet that my parents did, in that I bought things I loved and wanted to live with, not ever what people told me I should buy because it would be good for my collection. And spent the next 28 years with Tom, still happening, buying art, building a home, and living with that. I ended up, I think actually when we started working on the show, I realized I had about 350 works of photography alone, which was not intentional, but I don't know, all of a sudden I just did. And we have paintings and sculpture and design objects, and it's really living with these things is one of the great joys of my life. So in those 28 years, I did build my own home, and exactly 30 years after our house in Savannah was on the cover of House Beautiful, my house was on the cover of House Beautiful, and it was very meaningful to me to proudly follow in my mother's footsteps. And it was also a moment where I realized, wow, I'm the grown-up now, and I have to live that way from now on. So 3 years ago, I was approached by the head of the photography department at the Metropolitan Museum about a gift of a couple photographs to commemorate the 150th anniversary of the museum. They were going around to all the trustees and asking, if you collect Chinese antiquities, could you give us a masterwork? And So I said, no problem. I'm happy to give you a couple photos. We'll discuss it. And then he said, well, actually, I'd like to do a show of your collection. And I was like, no, what do you mean a show of my collection? That's silly. You don't have to bribe me that way. I can give you the photos. And he said, no, really, I think it'll be fun because we are friendly and it'll be interesting. And you actually don't even realize this, but you have been collecting photos that the Met, for one reason or another, let slip through their fingers over the years. I have a lot of photos by women artists that they just had never bought because you didn't, and some other things, and some contemporary works that they actually couldn't afford to buy today, as many of those are more expensive than older pictures. So I thought a lot about it, and I finally agreed because I realized, well, I actually might be able to have an impact on the museum's collection and on the public, and it would be amazing to have these pieces become part of such a storied, possibly the most storied collection of art in the history of the world. So I agreed, and I was still giving 2 photos, and then I don't know, all of a sudden, as my husband said, they had talked 68 photos off the wall into their collection. And the gift became formulated as 68 photos for now. Of course, I can always add to it if I want. And we started working on the show. And I thought that I would just go through a few photos with you that I owned so you could get a sense of what I see when I look at a photo and why I buy it. This first one is by an artist named Cindy Sherman, who is now a very famous art photographer. When I bought this picture in 1994, I had never heard of her. I didn't know anything about her. I just was sitting in the audience at an auction and I saw it on the screen, really, just like that, because it's only 8 by 10. You couldn't even see it up on the dais. And I don't know, I just had a reaction. I said, I gotta have that. Some of the things I really loved about it was that there's in this little 8 by 10 image, there's a whole story being told of what I imagine to be a really good girl in her bobby socks and long skirt who's lost her way a little bit, probably running away from home because she's misunderstood, maybe trying to get home after she already ran away. And I thought it was amazing that you could figure out a story. You don't even see her face. But there's so much in that photograph, the way it's staged. And Cindy Sherman actually puts herself in every single solitary photo she takes. That's one of her, it's her, it's not a trick, but it's her practice. And she dresses up in costumes of all kinds and explores other roles and personalities. And I sort of feel like I've done that as well in my life. And I just also think the way the white shirt kind of, I don't know if you can really tell from this, but the way her white shirt works with the center line in the photo, I think is very beautiful, and the details are amazing. Her sad little suitcase. Anyway, that I just had to have it. I bought it. I paid, back then, I guess I paid the most that had ever been paid for one of her works, which I didn't know because I didn't know who she was. And it's become one of the most valuable in my collection. And the Met was absolutely thrilled that I included it in the gift because it's an iconic work of contemporary photography, and they would have never been able to get it. So I did realize that that was a nice way to make an impact. This next photo, another one that I really love that clearly tells a story, a difficult story that I felt I really knew from growing up in Savannah and in the South. The photo is from 1955 from Charleston. The Met actually had a copy of this photo, but it wasn't a very good copy. And so when I offered this as part of the gift, they were thrilled. They sold their other copy, and then used the funds to buy some other photos. It's a very beautiful print, and you can really see in the tones of the dark black, and then the white. I think a whole story about race and America and class, and I also see a lot of love in that picture. And I think it's an incredibly poignant picture and one of my very favorites in my collection. And finally, this picture was taken by Walker Evans in 1936. It was actually taken in Savannah, looking into a photographer's studio window. Walker Evans and James A.G. traveled the South talking to Depression-era farmers and people who were suffering during the Depression. And there was a book called Let Us Now Praise Famous Men, which is the first time I saw this photo. James A.G. wrote the text, and Walker Evans took the pictures, and I just loved the idea that the text was telling a story and the pictures were telling the same story visually. I just thought that was amazing. And so I always remembered this photo, obviously because it was in Savannah. And I had the opportunity, I went into an art fair one day, I saw it on the wall, and I just said, I'll take it. I didn't even ask how much it was, and I made my dad one time when he came to New York, sit in front of it with a magnifying glass to see if he could recognize anyone. He was annoyed and he didn't. And he said, Anne, they all look the same. How am I supposed to figure out who these people were? Plus I was a baby. And I just thought, wow, they all look the same. Another really interesting commentary on, the society that he grew up in and I grew up in. But it's an amazing print, and was actually the print that Walker Evans used anytime he had an exhibition, because all photography, there can be many prints, and some are great and some are not so great. Some are printed by the artists when they take them, and some are printed years later by children or studio assistants. So the quality of the print is very important for my collection, and for the Met, obviously. So we worked on this show for 3 years, and the show opened. There I am at the opening of my show on March 9th, 2020. The show closed on March 12th, 2020, when the museum closed because of COVID. And not to bring the house down, but a week later, both my parents had died of COVID. And they'd come home to Savannah and died. And so the show took on an unbelievable significance for me and my family. It was a thrill. And I said it that night, and I say it again, to be able to celebrate this accomplishment with my parents. I'm sad my dad is not here today to hear this talk. He would have loved it more than anybody. But it was wonderful that they got to see it. And they're also one of the lasting legacies of the show, because it did open again in August of 2020 and close after Thanksgiving of 2020. So a few people saw it. There's a beautiful catalog that they made, which is always a lasting legacy of a show at a museum, which is at the Met, if anyone cares. You can buy it. And eventually, one thing I forgot to mention is my gift is a promised gift to the Met, which means I can live with the photos for my lifetime, and they go to the Met after I die. Or if I choose to give them before, that's fine, but my children won't have the opportunity to sell them out from under anybody. They are pledged to the Met. which is where they will go. So my parents, as I said, and as Dr. Presley mentioned, had a real love of the arts. And so all of a sudden, my siblings and I found ourselves in the place where, I mean, my parents, they have so much stuff, it's actually insane. Because they traveled the world and they brought things home from every place they went. And they bought things, in Santa Fe and New York. So we started thinking about what the hell we could do with all this stuff. And some of it's junk and some of it's fantastic. But Dad had always said that he really wanted his pottery collection to be kept together if possible and go to a museum. And we found out that the Hood Museum at Dartmouth actually has a large collection of art of indigenous people of the Americas. And we called them up and said, do you have any interest in this collection? Because believe it or not, it's not that easy to give away art all the time. They have to be able to care for it and store it. And that costs money, space, and it's manpower. But they were really fantastic and said, oh, we'd love it. This would be incredible. And we'd love to do a show and a catalog. So that is all in the works. And again, it is an amazing synergy that Dad went to Dartmouth and we could close that loop somehow. And he would be thrilled with that. Also, we have donated this print of Georgia O'Keeffe that a very famous indigenous artist named Fritz Scholder, he's one of the grandfathers of indigenous painting, did of Georgia O'Keeffe, and we donated it to the museum in Santa Fe. A very close friend of our parents ran that museum and asked us if we'd consider giving it, and we were thrilled to do that for that museum. And it also cements their legacy, as every single time this picture is exhibited, it will say, there's a label that says from the collection of Arnold and Laura Tenenbaum, and that's lovely for our grandchildren, their grandchildren and ours, hopefully one day. And finally, this print this is a picture by an African-American artist named Kara Walker. Mom used to say that this was a favorite of hers, and she used to say that she really wished that this picture would go to the Telfair one day because she wanted African-American kids to see images of themselves and their stories told by African-American artists and people who, really understood in a different way what their lives were filled with. So we have given that to the Telfair, and it will be part of the show that at some point we're going, in I believe 2023, we are going to have a show at the Telfair of my parents' collection and a version of my photography show at the Met, which will be really fantastic way to bring it all home, which after all is something very important to me and my siblings and all my family. And lastly, I just thought I would show this picture. This is a print that my parents bought in the early 70s. They actually belonged to something called Print of the Month Club. And you could buy prints for $50 or $100, like a record club. And this one showed up, and I hated it with a passion because to me it looked like I was 10, and it looked like a piece of paper with slashes and holes in it. And I could not fathom how I was going to explain this to my friends when they would say, what in the hell is that? And, oh, that's crap, that's not art. All the things that I actually felt when I looked at this picture. And I spent a lot of years reconciling in my own mind the things my parents told me about why this was art. And I really see this picture as a representation of my own growth as a person, who I am, and the foundation of my taste as a collector. So that's a portion of my story. I thank y'all for listening. I think I got in under the wire of 25 minutes, 3 seconds left. And thank you. And if y'all have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. I don't know if you feel comfortable, but.
That was wonderful. Oh, we have Bernice.
Perfect, Bernice. Thank you so much. Oh, also, I just have to say, I realized halfway through my speech that I was wearing my sunglasses. I was not doing that on purpose. I apologize for looking like I thought I was cool or something. But their prescription, I can't read without them, so I was stuck. So I apologize for that.
Adds to the effect. So, Anne, the Tenenbaum family certainly has left a beautiful mark on this town and has moved the needle with education and the arts. And on behalf of the Rotary Club of Savannah, this is an actual seedling from the Candler Oak. So it's part of one of our areas of focus. So Zoe can let you know if it will grow in New York City. Well, a tree grows in Brooklyn, right? So it should. So here's that. Don't go away. Hold on one second. I'd now like to have Alderman Nick Palumbo come to the podium for a special presentation on behalf of the City of Savannah and Mayor Van Johnson.
Well, thank you all so much. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Marjorie, so much for allowing me the opportunity to come and speak. I have a small surprise. I'm not the mayor of Savannah, but if there was any possible way that he could be here, he certainly would be. So I have a letter on his behalf and a little something to present, and it reads as follows. I sincerely apologize for not being able to be in person with you today, but I'm grateful to my colleague, Alderman Nick Palumbo, Vice Chairman of Savannah City Council, for standing in my stead. As we continue to evaluate our many losses during the last 2 years of this COVID crisis, our first losses were among our most significant. Arnold and Laura Lee Tenenbaum were titans of life in Savannah. Their love and support of community, youth, the arts is legendary and too numerous to mention here. But rest assured, if there was something positive happening in Savannah, the Tenenbaums were associated with it. From the Savannah Vision 2020, which still guides our city today, that Mr. Tenenbaum helped to engineer, to Savannah's Youth Futures Authority, and even a stint as the president of this very Rotary Club of Savannah and Rotarian of the Year, Savannah is better because Mr. and Mrs. Tenenbaum were Savannians. And I cannot fathom how it must have felt to lose both of your parents within 5 days of each other. But you and your family are the recipients of a rich legacy of love and service. We cry because they're gone, but we smile because they were here. As the mayor of the city of Savannah, I have the singular ability to award the city's highest honor to extraordinary people for their extraordinary service, and it is my pleasure to present the key of the city of Savannah posthumously to honor the life, legacy, and service of Arnold and Laura Lee Tenenbaum. May their memories be a blessing.
Thank you so much.
Please, here we are.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Please thank the mayor. It's really, really, really meaningful for us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry. It's beautiful.
Please, Carl.
Thank you. It's very special, and we will cherish this forever. And thank you all again.
That's for you.
Write my letter.
Okay, we're all crying up here.
Sorry.
Wow. That was beautiful. Nick, thank you so much for making that happen. And Celia, thank you. Okay, we've got a few announcements before we go. I just want to reiterate that in 2023, the Tenenbaum collection will be here, and Ben Simons will have more information about that show. We also, after 2 long years, the Savannah Philharmonic is returning to the Lucas with more accessible pricing. February 12th features an award-winning pianist, and you can go to their website to get more information. And the Savannah Music Festival is looking for some volunteers like ushering, and that does count for our service above self. So there's some more information, but we're gonna call the meeting adjourned. Thank you.